one thing that is a synapomorphy of the eukaryotes. Is having a true sexual life cycle. So in this drawing exercise, I'm just going to diagram sex. And I promise you it's not going to be in a way that you're going to want to slam your laptop shut if your roommate comes in or anything like that. Nothing prurient, nothing that's going to excite you. This is a very boring way to talk about sex, I assure you. All right. And nothing will be graphic. But, so we're talking very generally about sex in eukaryotes. Okay, so your generalized sexual life cycle is all about going back and forth between two different states. Being haploid, or having one copy of each of your sets of chromosomes, and being diploid, or having two sets of chromosomes in your cells. Single set or double set, haploid or diploid. Okay, so how we go from being diploid to being haploid is through the process we should know as meiosis, meiosis, also known as reduction division. And the thing that's very important that happens in meiosis is we start with a diploid cell and we end up with haploid cells. That is the function of meiosis. Now in animals we think, this is how we make gametes. That's true, but that is not true for all eukaryotes. Different eukaryotes have different ways of using meiosis, but they all use it for the same purpose of going from diploid to haploid. I'll explain that as we move through this. Okay, so then how do we go back to diploid from being haploid? Well, we do that through a process called fertilization, or syngamy is effectively a synonym for fertilization. Fertilization restores diploid cells from haploid cells. And in general, the way that works is we'll have gametes, and we can define gametes as the last haploid cells in any sexual life cycle. Gametes are going to fuse together, two of them, and they're going to form a single cell. And I'm just going to tattoo it with a Z, because otherwise it just looks like a circle. Z in this case is not for Zanzo, it is for zygote. What is a zygote? A zygote is the first diploid cell in any sexual life cycle. So this right here is your generalized case of a sexual life cycle going back and forth between being diploid and haploid, haploid and diploid. Gametes fusing to form a zygote, and then that diploid cell, somehow or another, eventually we're going to end up producing more haploid cells. Okay? Generalized case. There are three variations on this theme. We've got zygotic meiosis, we've got gametic meiosis, and we have sporic meiosis, more commonly referred to as alternation of generations. Okay, so zygotic meiosis, gametic meiosis, alternation of generations. And I'm going to need to turn the page. I don't think I have enough room to draw my zygotic meiosis on here. Maybe I'll try and get 2 on the next page. Maybe I'll be able to get all 3. So I did write them out in that order because it's the evolutionary order. It is thought that the first eukaryotes that had a sexual life cycle underwent zygotic meiosis. And zygotic meiosis, this means the zygote undergoes meiosis, which also means that these organisms are going to be haploid dominant. They spend most of their life in a haploid state. As I just mentioned, this is thought to be the most plesiomorphic, the most ancestral, the first one of these types to have evolved. And this is a process that we see in fungi and some protists. Protists are going to factor into all 3 of these, and that is very telling because typically a sexual life cycle like zygotic meiosis or gametic meiosis or sporic meiosis is something that doesn't just flip-flop back and forth between one type to the other type. All fungi have this type of process. All animals have gametic meiosis. All plants have sporic meiosis. So why are protists doing so many different things? Because protists are not a good clade. It's a descriptive term for eukaryotes that aren't plants, animals, or fungi. So it's not a clade. All right. But what's happening? So for all of these, it's all about going back and forth between diploid and haploid, just like in the previous drawing, and haploid to diploid through fertilization. Okay, so I'm going to fuse some gametes here. And that's going to give us a zygote. Just to repeat, zygote is our first diploid cell. That diploid cell does not undergo any mitosis, no cell division at all. It immediately undergoes meiosis, zygote undergoes meiosis, to give us haploid cells. These haploid cells can then undergo mitosis and produce a haploid organism. And it could be a haploid multicellular organism. And that is very weird. That's not something we typically see in the animals. Now, our haploid organism has to produce its gametes somehow through cell division. But we can only go through meiosis once, because our options are either to be diploid or haploid. We can't take a haploid number of chromosomes and divide that in half again, or every generation we'd be losing chromosomes. So we produce the gametes. This is going to sound weird, but the gametes are produced by mitosis. Let's write that again. Gametes produced by mitosis. So for a lot of students who are taking introductory biology, they might remember from high school, oh, no. Ms. Smith told me gametes are produced by meiosis. That's not true for all eukaryotes. And here's a case where that is not true. So banish the thought from your mind that the only way you can produce gametes is by meiosis. All right? So that is zygotic meiosis for you. Over here, I'm going to draw gametic meiosis. And this is going to seem more familiar because this is what we find in animals. So in gametic meiosis, yes, the gametes are produced by meiosis. These organisms are diploid dominant. And this is something that we see in animals, of which we are a part, and again, some protists. Okay, so once again, we're going to go back and forth between these two boxes. Hopefully you're picking up on the pattern here. I'm going to put meiosis over here, going diploid to haploid. I'm going to put fertilization over here. Haploid to diploid. I'm going to fuse some gametes to produce a zygote. And then now, unlike over here, this zygote is going to undergo mitosis and produce a diploid organism. So pick an animal, any animal. My dog just walked in the room, so I'm going to draw a picture of him. There's my boy. He's a diploid organism. He's an animal. And he's going to use meiosis to produce the gametes. He's not because he's been neutered, but poor brother. So our diploid animal is going to produce gametes by meiosis, and those are the only haploid cells in the entire life cycle, are the gametes. Okay, I think I can fit my third one down here. So I will. So sporic meiosis is thought to be the most derived, the most recently evolved of these three forms. It's also known as alternation of generations. So in sporic meiosis, we get both haploid and diploid organisms. They might be multicellular organisms, both haploid and diploid. Again, this is the most derived condition, or apomorphic. It's another way of saying that. And this is something we see in plants and some protists. Typically algae. but some protists have this alternation of generations. So one more time, I'm going to draw my boxes, and draw an arrow, some arrows like that. What's this going to be? Going from diploid to haploid. Oh, it's meiosis there. It's meiosis. It's going to be meiosis here. And going back and forth from haploid back to diploid. What's going to be over here? Fertilization. And once again, we're going to fuse a pair of gametes to form a zygote. This time we're going to undergo mitosis. We're going to divide that zygote by mitosis. And we're going to end up with might be like, what is that? Is that like a long skinny poop? No, it's not a long skinny poop. I'll make it green just so it doesn't look so much like a long skinny poop. That's an alga. That's what we call one algae. So we have a diploid, multicellular organism. And typically in organisms that have sporic meiosis, we call this diploid multicellular organism the sporophyte, because its job is to produce the spores. The spores are what put the spore in sporic meiosis. So our sporophyte is going to produce spores by meiosis. Those cells, those spores, are going to undergo mitosis. So hopefully now you recognize how this is different. We had mitosis over here from the zygote. We're now having mitosis happening over here with the spores. And these previous two, we either had mitosis on the haploid side or mitosis on the diploid side, but now we're seeing it in both. In both. Okay? So now we're going to have mitosis, and in this case, I'm going to draw isomorphic alternation of generations, which means that the haploid organism and the diploid organism look pretty much exactly the same. We can't really tell which one is which. And that does happen in some algae. Oops, that's Bretta, who's my diploid organism. Because now over here, since I've squeezed everything onto one page, now I've got my haploid multicellular organism. And this haploid multicellular organism, this is our sporophyte because it produces spores. This haploid multicellular organism, we're going to call it the gametophyte, or the gamete-producing plant. And its job is to produce the gametes. But remember what happened over here when we had a haploid organism, and it needed to produce its gametes. Couldn't use meiosis. What's it going to use? It's got to be mitosis. So once again, we have a case where the gametes are produced by mitosis. Two of the three types of sexual life cycles have gametes being produced by mitosis. And you're like, ugh, that sounds so weird. Because that's not what we do. That's not what animals do. We produce our gametes by meiosis, But it turns out that that's kind of the weird way to do things compared to other eukaryotes. Okay, so we're going to see a lot of this in the plants. All of our life cycles are going to alternate between having a gametophyte and a sporophyte. Which one is dominant is going to be important. We're going to see more of this zygotic meiosis when we get into the fungi, and we're going to see gametic meiosis when we get into the animals. Okay, there you go.